The day before Thanksgiving in 1971, a man identifying himself as Dan Cooper bought a plane ticket from Portland to Seattle. He hijacked the plane, claiming he had a bomb in his briefcase, and demanded $200,000 and 4 parachutes. He jumped out of the plane with the money and the bomb somewhere over the Pacific Northwest, never to be seen again. The FBI claims to have investigated over 1,000 people, including dozens of deathbed confessions. In 2016, 45 years after the hijacking, the FBI suspended its investigation of the case. While the FBI is no longer looking for DB Cooper, there is a community of people who are trying to solve the case on their own. Welcome to the Cooper Vortex. In this episode, we're lucky to be joined by my humble pal and runner-up in the DB Cooper Fantasy Football League. He hails from Southwest Oregon and is a U.S. Army veteran. His Ivy League education led him to great success in the financial world. He's been to all 50 states, and he and his family are active in 4-H and high school sports. Enjoy this episode with my good friend, Chris Brower. All right, Chris, let me ask you this. How old are you?
I'm 61.
Okay, so you probably don't have a real strong memory of the hijacking.
No, I was a young boy and just very general recollection about it.
When was the first time you really learned the story?
I would say probably around the time of the money find. I was about 18 and remember that being covered in the press. And I guess the impact from that was being a little surprised it hadn't been solved, or that the finding of the money didn't lead to some quick resolution. And then over the years after that, I just had a kind of general understanding of the case.
And when did you fall into the vortex?
Well, I remember it well. It was you were on stage there for it. It was at Kiggins Theater, CooperCon 2021, and I decided to attend and just see in person some of these speakers that I saw listed and so forth.
How much were you in the vortex before going to that?
Really not too much, just a general, very, an interest in the case, but not detailed knowledge about it and so forth. But, living here in Oregon and seeing the proximity of CooperCon, I said, well, I got to go up there and take that in. And really, Marty Andrade's talk about the high pull rate of these flight crews jumping out of, damaged aircraft. That was a great talk. It got me thinking more about probabilities that he may have survived. Mark Meltzer's talk about parachutes. I bought Bruce Smith's book. I bought Marty's book, and I just try to get more educated about the case at that point.
So in 2021, that's a pretty good time to enter the case.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Did you see yourself solving it?
No. I think it was twofold. It might help me to know more about it. And then it was really about 5 months after that. I think it was April of 2022 when Eric Eulis found a patent that he thought kind of aligned with some of what was on the Macron particles. And I didn't know anything about those spreadsheets, or, I just knew kind of in general fashion about the 2017 information. And I think it was at that time when I looked at those spreadsheets and how they were spread out among many tabs. And I thought, well, maybe what I could do is try to use some Excel knowledge to put that information in ways that metals experts could look at, like here are the most common ways that this element appeared or that one. And so that was the first time I thought, well, maybe I could contribute some Excel knowledge to that part of the case.
Hell yeah, everyone should be doing stuff like that. All hands on deck.
Mm-hmm.
And so then you start working on that project with Nikki and Eric at that point?
Well, once Eric had identified those, I reached out to Nikki, and he had already started looking into the the patent inventors on that titanium antimony patent, and he had already started looking into that. So then he and I kind of collaborated at that point to get a better understanding. Okay, the totality of the tie, what's on there in general, like a lot of titanium, over 10,000 particles, what companies were doing things with titanium, and then more specifically about the titanium and antimony. So it was kind of interesting. We were looking at companies throughout the US, following the trail of those three, and then who worked with them at RemCrew and later Crucible.
And how are you figuring that out?
Well, one of my favorite search tools is the Google patent search. So patents.google.com. And I find it very helpful because you can pick a date range. Like you could say, I want to look at everything from 1964 right up to the jump date. And you can say, I just want to look at US patents. You can look by person or company. And most importantly, you can search for certain element combinations. And of course, there's the caveat that not all research leads to a patent. But there's a strong correlation there. And what I liked about it is there's just so many hundreds of thousands of patents in that database that you can get a good sense. You have a large field to search from versus just general looking for research papers and what you might find like in a general search. The other thing that helped Nikki and I was Nikki had contact with a metals expert. And so if we had questions about a path we were looking into, he could give us kind of a neutral opinion on those that kind of helped us to move, and we eventually looked at over 100 metallurgists that were at RemCrew and Crucible, and well over another 100 at other companies that were in that field.
And what are you looking for when you're looking at those guys?
Well, once we find someone who we could look at, age, we could look at, did they have any aviation experience? One interesting thing when looking at Crucible personnel was I actually found an individual, talked to him on the phone. He's in his 70s now, but he was a young man in the late 1960s, early 70s, who worked at Midland for Crucible, and he had over 600 parachute jumps. And so he was able to kind of give information about the Salem, Ohio jump center that he would go to. And of course, I asked him, hey, did you run into any metallurgists there? And he didn't, but he was able to kind of give us some information about how segmented or how much interaction there was. He worked, on the floor, no ties on the floor. Did you guys in the cold steel area, did you interact with the titanium or whatnot? And he was able to give some information about, they might bring down something to test or whatnot. So we looked for any, aviation experience, something that went beyond just direct metals connection to what appeared to match what was on the tie.
The guy you talked to from Midland, he had to have been pretty shocked to be talking to someone about DB Cooper.
Well, I didn't say that it was about, DB Cooper, because I didn't want to hear a click, right after I dialed him up. But I said, I'm researching, Crucible back in the late 60s, early 70s. He was a great gentleman to talk to and very good recall. And, I could ask him specific questions about, where was the titanium shop, or do you remember the metallurgical lab? And it was mostly just to get a feel for what was it like on the floor of this steel mill. And that was right next to a titanium operation. So, and we knew, or I knew early on, based on his age and so forth, I wasn't talking to a potential POI, but I thought maybe he was going to say, yeah, there were 40 of us that would constantly go out there, but it wasn't the case. He really only knew a couple of his colleagues that also did all those jumps. So there was a center about a half hour away, but that didn't develop in any leads.
You didn't ask him anything about DB Cooper.
I didn't. No.
Chris, you coward. I can't believe it.
I guess I could have said, did you know anybody this height and age and so forth? But I didn't, I
You
knew that
should
I
have
could always
ended
call
the
him
phone
back.
call with, do you know who DB Cooper was?
That's probably could have gone that route for sure.
I end most of my conversations that way, so it's not that big a
Okay.
deal. Okay, so anyway, where did this steel journey start taking you guys?
Well, one of the things that we noticed was the three patent holders uh, had started having who, and they were based at Battelle Memorial Institute in Columbus, Ohio. And REM crew would send them the titanium, and then their lab in the 50s would test different combinations of things. They were trying to find in general what good titanium alloys for aerospace might be for national defense purposes. And then they would send everything back to REM crew, the material and so forth. And then we found that those three gentlemen were working with a guy named Milton Vordahl. He became the guy at REM crew who just started doing it in-house. And then we looked at who Vordahl was working with and then worked all the way up to 1971, just any metallurgist that had patents with titanium and so forth. And that's kind of how we eventually, Ryan, Nikki, and I, we're just trying to follow what was best connected to those particles. And then separately, we were looking at, well, what else is on the tie? For example, so there's 105,000 particles, and about 10,000 of them have some amount of titanium. And you can also look at a subset of all the particles that are oxygen free, because the information we were getting from the metals expert was no oxygen or low oxygen can be indicative of an alloy. And if you do searches for titanium alloy, whether it's from 1951 to 1971 or it's 1964 to 1971 in the tie era, top 20 are REM crew, crucible, titanium metals, which were all three places that Vordahl worked at. And so we just kind of were looking at what companies would align with the general things found on the tie. And out of all the 4,000 oxygen-free particles, fully half of them, titanium is the main element. The other thing that one sees looking at what's on the tie, you see pure titanium, you see titanium and just aluminum, titanium and just silicon. So we were looking maybe for specialty metals, some place that would be testing specific combinations and different weights. Part of the thinking was if half of the particles were all the same elements and weights, maybe that's somebody like at a production line that's you working with the same titanium product over and over, and you might see just a lot of that, but you see a wide variety there. So in general, we were looking at those three particles and then just trying to get a better feel for what industries, geographies, or people might match the overall tie.
But you guys landed on Vordahl.
Yes, ultimately, what was interesting, about following him. He lived in the Northwest, was born in Washington State, was living in Washington State, had just gotten laid off in August of 71, titanium metals, credit union had just, had been frozen. And he was involved in the SST program. And when we look at Crucible personnel with some connection to the Northwest, he seemed to be the one that was, definitely most affiliated and familiar with that area. And he had, been in Hanford in World War II with that aspect of the Manhattan Project, and grew up in the Spokane area. So the last thing we knew about him was what he looked like. We knew he was 58. And so I liked working with Nikki and Ryan because we really just were trying to follow whatever that path was. And, okay, now, and then we had some family cooperation, and that was very helpful too. And from the grandson getting us pictures and things like that.
What does the family think of all this? Especially now that it's not public, but for this community it is.
I find it interesting because usually there's a strong reaction one way or the other. Oh yeah, I told you that Uncle Johnny, he was up to something back then in 71, or they flat out deny it. But I would say they're very ambivalent. They're open to the idea. They're finding stuff. His house is still that he lived in is still in the family. It's visited occasionally by the grandson and his family. So, Nikki did a good job, I think, just keeping the lines of communication open, letting him know, hey, are you good if we talk about this at CooperCon 2022? Here's what we were able to show him information about his grandfather that he didn't know. So he found that interesting, and we felt like we had looked into that aspect as much as we could. And so it was kind of time to put it out there and let other people look into his background with the blessing of the grandson.
How confident are you that Milton Vordahl was Cooper?
I mean, I would not say certain by any means, but and my bias is going to be toward the having some connection to the ties. So my quick answer will be not certain, but out of what I've followed, the most likely candidate, but I'm not saying that's 90 or 80%. I'm always looking forward to more information coming from Tom Kay, and trying to see where that heads.
But what if Cooper got the tie from a thrift store?
Well, here's my thinking on that. Most people, if they're going to donate used clothing to a thrift store, are going to do so generally where they live. And again, it's a matter of probabilities, but I would say 90%. If I'm going to donate a used tie, it's probably going to be a thrift store near where I live. And if I'm going to buy a used tie at a thrift store, it's probably near where I live. And so if that tie could be shown, for example, to really only align with a company that was in St. Louis or in a very unique industry, I think it would still help us narrow the search, even if it came through a thrift store, which I think is a lower probability than it always belonged to the hijacker. But I think the thrift store doesn't necessarily mean it was far away from where it accumulated these articles.
That's a great answer. That is a great answer. Did you have that loaded and chambered already?
Well, we thought about that because, that's going to be a good question. How do you know it's Cooper's? Or, you get it sometimes. How do we know an earlier passenger didn't leave it on the plane and Cooper was just sitting on it? Or, so we try to use, I guess, a decision tree, if you will. Is it all right? We think it's his. Well, what if it isn't? I even looked into there were 5 thrift stores in Portland. So I was trying to get an idea of how many. There was one in Clark County. not necessarily that Cooper came from there, but in case he showed up and was looking for a last minute thing, I couldn't really find a large number, as large a number maybe as in other places at the time or as we see nowadays. But yeah, we really did give thought to that. What if it is, if he got it, what would the ramifications be? But it I think it's still worthwhile to pursue where the tie may have been.
I agree with you 100% on all of that. I think the probability of it being a thrift store tie is low. So, yeah, I believe that was Cooper's tie.
Mhm. One of the other things, knowing the tie aspect, and if the tie, let's say, is connected to Rem Crew or Crucible, I love that. I think it was 1968. There's an ad I found where it says, Crucible makes these smooth Boeing 727 flights possible. And in this ad, there's a picture of a 727, and in there it reminds us that the vast majority of titanium alloys at the time were from Crucible, so that you would think it's either a customer of theirs or from their R&D efforts, but it shows the brakes on the plane, and so some connection there. So uh the other thing that intrigued me about the tie is that the FBI administratively closed the case in 2016. And then in 2017, you get all this data in these spreadsheets. And so I thought, well, I'm looking at something that at least, the FBI hasn't already poured over and had access to. Now, you could argue that maybe they wouldn't have done anything with it, but at least it was my overall goal was to get more metals experts or people who could interpret what's on the tie and then get the information in a way they could quickly look at it. And Ryan Burns's website, norjack.org, it has a tie particle section, and a lot of these PDFs that I made are there so that people could see, there are over 8,000 different element orderings in those spreadsheets. So you could see what the most common ones are, or if you think, the fact that there's strontium on there means something to you, that they could quickly just go to a quick one-page thing on that element and go with it. So that would be my ideal, to see more people with a metals background or even a computer background to have that try to match something, because it just might take just a few of those to be someplace unique.
I'm sure you forced a few metallurgists to look at it.
I don't know any. We have the one that was helping. He's always quick to respond yes or no, but you know he doesn't necessarily have time to pour over all those things. But he is very helpful if you say, gosh, I can't even spell lanthanum. What is that? Or what is you know like you had today, it came up a question about, I think it was barium chloride. And so with patents.google.com, you can quickly see if a company like Crucible, which they did have reference to that in some of their work, but we looked at Reynolds Aluminum, Alcoa, a company right next to Alcoa on Northwest Lower River Road called Carborundum, which makes silicon carbide. It's the largest plant west of the Mississippi. And there's a lot of silicon on the tie. So we really spent more time looking at companies other than Crucible, but we just kept coming back to them.
Why does everything in this case have to be so weird? Like, you have the Tina Bar find, which we'll of course talk about, but even the one piece of evidence that's left on the plane, Cooper's tie, it can't just be like, oh yeah, we found some pollen from the Pacific Northwest on there, and yeah, some salt and pepper and matchstick residue. It has to be this weird, unique series of metals that just sends us on another goose chase.
Right. You use the word salt. Even that's a mystery. What kind of salt is on the
What
tie?
kind of salt is salt? I've seen that debate and it's just, I'm going crazy. Like now we're debating salt.
Right. Now, one other thing I meant to mention was a different metals person in the group. He said that one of the things on the tie was something called globular silicon, and that was a strong indication that the tie had been in a steel mill. And the only reason I bring that up is it seems like, you may be looking, or we may be looking for some company that was both steel oriented and titanium oriented. And there could be others other than Crucible, but sometimes, like for example, Crucible only had one office in Washington State, and it's 1 mile from Boeing Field. I mean, that was a main customer. Boeing flew two REM crew, and we know that REM crew flew to Boeing. So there's a lot of interaction between the two companies. I remember there's one newspaper headline. I think it was Pittsburgh Specialty Steels Capital of America, so very similar to that. So that was kind of a surprise to me. I knew that they had steel mills, but I didn't realize one of the things that we kind of got up to speed on was specialty metals and specialty steel. And a lot of that was in the Pittsburgh area, different companies there.
Where Ted Braden was hanging out.
Yes. hmm
Okay, so there's another suspect in this the REM crew connection, and that's Vince Peterson. What do you think of Vince Peterson as a suspect? Because he would have the same tie connection that Vordahl does. Like literally the exact same.
There's a picture of the two of them. What we felt made Vordahl a stronger candidate was we could show that although there was a titanium lab, in Robinson Township, which is near the Pittsburgh airport, western part, and Vordahl had been up in Midland, which is about 40 minutes, a half hour north of there. So in 65, Vordahl says, you know what, I'm actually going to leave and I'm going to go all the way out to Henderson, Nevada, and I'm going to work for titanium metals. And in fact, another gentleman, Howard Bomberger, he left to go to RMI in Ohio about the same time. So I don't know if it's the case that the titanium folks in Midland were, opted to leave or were asked to leave, but the bottom line was it was the patent, the one tie era patent that has titanium as primary, tested at exactly 17% antimony, and had the small amounts of like aluminum and silicon that were in these three particles. We felt if the tie particles most closely align with Vordahl, then that's who we're going to go with. We felt like he also went to titanium metals, which exposed him to, which was another top 20 company in a lot of these things. And of course, his manager was Don Cooper, who was the individual who laid him off. We just felt he had more of a strong Pacific Northwest. So for us, it was, and everybody will have a different opinion, but we had a strong opinion that it was more likely to be Vordahl if it's a tie particle person at a crew.
Well, the tie particles absolutely match Vince Peterson to the skyjacking. 100%. But nothing else I've seen about Vince Peterson matches.
Yeah, one of the things about Vordahl is if you do a patent search for titanium alloys in all people that filed a U.S. patent over 20 years over this, tie era period, he's gonna always be in the top 20, if not the top five. I mean, he was constantly working with different varieties of titanium, and I don't see the volume of that R&D, at least in the patent world, from Peterson. So yeah, it's a judgment call, but from what we actually spoke to a metallurgist from the late 1950s who then went to law school and became a crucible patent attorney. So we were asking him about, okay, what was it like with and he kind of made it sound more vertical. You'd have a guy like a Vordahl and then a staff that, might assist him. And then you might have a different metallurgist and he or, would have a staff and so forth. And so, yes, there probably could be the presence of the titanium and antimony where others could access it, but we just felt like the strongest direct connection was Vordahl.
But what do you think about Vince Peterson as a suspect?
I think they would have noticed, his whatever the situation is with his finger, the part of the hair on the right side. And I just see more likeness to the sketches from Vordahl, kind of the darker olivish skin color. We know Vordahl was outside a lot, constantly golfing. We tracked everything down we could on him. We know his bowling score, for example. So,
what do you think of some of Vordahl's writings?
what's a good adjective? Eclectic, unusual. That was one of the things when we started reading through those. It definitely indicates a unique mindset, and we knew some of the things about earlier in life decisions that might have indicated a person who, when faced with a challenge such as being laid off, or you probably know the last patent that he had published was the day before the jump. So it was on 11/23 of 71. Again, that's probably just vortex, but yeah, read the writings. If you read Peterson's letter to the editor, it was I think it was to ask children to please use life jackets. And then you read Vordahl, and you know, very, very different mindset.
Oh, yeah. He's a wild guy. But
Yeah.
reading some of his stuff, and obviously I have insane bias here because I was already being fed him as a suspect by the time I got those letters sent to me. But reading that, I could picture DB Cooper as that guy. I really could. Just like doesn't care about anyone else, but maybe not in a bad way. Like he's not going to go out of his way to hurt someone, but if somebody got hurt in an accident, like, well, that's life.
Mhm. Yes, and he had to deal with a lot of tragedy growing up. A brother drowns and just different things. I mean, how many kids do you know in high school are in the chemistry club and the rifle club? A very different personality. you know, he could hit the titanium at 50 yards. So
Yeah.
he was, just an interesting guy to learn more about, and hopefully we can still get more information about his small town house that's still in the family, just to maybe confirm or eliminate, get more certainty about him.
Find a hidden compartment with $194,000 in it.
Yeah, I mean it's almost torture sometimes. You get a picture of a unusual lockbox, a big, and he says we can't open it the normal way, and then you finally figure out that Milton had put this crazy turnable handle custom made on it, and it opened up and it was just kind of standard stuff. There was no NB6 in there or something. So
Yeah, and in the timing of everything in his life being laid off, and I could see him being in a bad place and then reading the newspaper and reading that Paul Sini skyjacking and Milton saying to himself, I could do so much better than that. I could do it so much better than that.
yeah, he seemed to be somebody who it's an ability to think of a new way. When you're trying to patent something different, you're kind of having to have a skill set to go outside of the box to some new way. Like how I think is, okay, within the box, how can I make it, better or more efficient? And he's thinking, well, we really can go outside and do this. The other thing about, he's from Spokane, and the town he was in is still a couple hours from there, but the flight went from Spokane to Portland, and the Spokane airport, there was some interesting things. Like you could in 71, the Ramada Inn at the airport, advertised you can listen to the control tower and see planes come in. And there's a picture 4 days after the jump in the Spokane paper. It's a couple sitting at the airport restaurant there, and you see a Northwest 727 with the stairs down in the background. Now it's so fuzzy you can't make out, which aircraft number it was or anything. But, if you wanted to just scout out things, you could easily do that from an airport that the plane would be flying through if you wanted to. And of course, his brother was a World War II pilot. He was in an interesting geographical position, kind of in between Spokane, Seattle, and Portland.
Yeah, he had a cool place on the river
Mhm.
outside Tri-Cities, I think, right?
Yes, yeah, small town, Pateros. More vortex because right next to that is Cooper Mountain, and then another one outside of town is Tina's Mountain, Tenas, but no apostrophe. So you know that's what kind of sucks you into the vortex, all these coincidences and things and I know the mind is looking for connections that may not always be there, but it's kind of funny sometimes when you see that.
Oh, of course. I love all that stuff. Is the flight path accurate?
I think so. I have no reason to question it. I think it was looked at very carefully. I trust the military folks, the Sage radar. So I haven't seen enough for me to be swayed that it went any different direction than the path. The interesting part for me is, seeing over time that the when he jumped along that path is kind of shifted a little more southward, but the path itself, no, I don't have any reason to think it wasn't exactly like the Air Force flight path.
Where do you think Cooper jumped? Or I should say, where do you think Cooper landed?
Well, I'm kind of relying on other people with more knowledge, the battleground area probably. Initially, right after in the days immediately after the jump, on the front page of the Oregonian that weekend after, the official jump area was up by, between Ariel, Longview, kind of the northern part of Clark County. But on the front page of the paper, it had a map in a circle kind of down by the orchards and battleground area. And it talked about a nonstop parade of cars, trucks, and motorcycles, as people were trying to find money. So I guess before I saw that, I was thinking, well, hardly anyone's going to be out there on Thanksgiving weekend looking for them. But apparently there were actually a lot of people that went up there and thought maybe they could find the money if the guy dropped it or something like that.
I've heard from a lot of locals that that Thanksgiving weekend that people were out in the woods looking for money. And I don't know how much of that just becomes like local legend and is overblown. Because I've heard living in that area and working in that area, I've had seriously at least 100 people tell me they knew the truth of the DB Cooper story and who it was. Because just that always happened in that area. You'd go to old Billy's house out in the woods and he'd tell you, "Oh, I know the truth behind the whole DB Cooper thing. Let me tell you, I know who it was." Like I'm sure you do. Yeah.
Right. I mean, one of the things you were talking about, where did he jump? We all knew from the the 302 that talked, I want to say it was 10 miles south of the Merwin Dam, but where Hessen is and the store there. And so I remember looking up, I was trying to look for were there any other break-ins kind of going on in Clark County, and that's where I came across the one the night of the jump at Casey's Corner. And that was after 11 p.m. That's on Lewis River Road, which is kind of at the northern, kind of within the official area. And that's where someone took the bizarre combination of cigarettes, cigars, and Polaroid film. But one of the reasons, that it may not be connected is because that is further north than we currently think, and again, I'm just relying on others more knowledgeable, but it seems like I'm going to say Battleground Orchards.
And that store, it right now it's a campground, and there's a campground store there. So I think at the time it may have been a campground also and a campground store. So if it is a campground store, the idea that I'm stealing cigarettes, cigars, and film makes sense.
Okay.
If I'm
Yep.
Cooper, the idea that I break in there, I'm like, you know what? I might want to take a selfie later. I better
Yeah.
get some film. He's not taking film.
Well, and in general, is he going to break into anything? He's probably just trying to stay off the radar and not do anything that's going to draw law enforcement attention, because in his mind, they don't know that he's there. They
Right.
think he could be anywhere down to Reno.
Yeah, and if that place was a campground back then, like it is now, you wouldn't want to sneak into a campground uh
Right,
to break into a building because that's the last thing you want to do. A bunch of hillbillies come out of their tent with their 9 millimeter.
right.
So does he survive the jump?
I would say yes. And the reason, part of it is I mentioned earlier about Marty Andrade's talk and the data from World War II. But also more recently, I came across an interesting story where an Army guy is being flown in a Army aircraft, a smaller one. It has a pilot, a guard, and him. And this is 1969. And the guy starts asking the guard about, hey, why is this parachute on the plane? Well, just in case there's an emergency. And well, how do you put it on? How do you use it? And the next thing the guard knows is there's a door, the aircraft open. This guy is put on the parachute, and at 3,000 feet, he jumps out. And the guy, pulls the ripcord. Somebody who apparently has no parachute knowledge. He wasn't an airborne soldier or anything. He safely gets to the ground. When darkness falls, he notices the lights of Topeka. This is in February. There's snow on the ground. He lost one shoe on the way down, and he walks 20 miles toward Topeka, and he's caught the next day there. But I thought, well, this guy doesn't know anything about parachutes, and suddenly he's opening the door of a plane he probably hasn't been on before, and he's pulling the ripcord, and he's getting to the ground, and he's not injured, and he's walking 20 miles. So I, based on, the high rate of success, of pilots and aircrew bailing out of control aircraft over enemy territory, and they haven't jumped before. I'd say it's very likely that he survived. I know that's not always a common opinion, but that's just my reading of things.
It should be. That's the correct opinion. That's the correct opinion. I mean, the idea that let's take his drop zone and go all the way from Lake Merwin to the Columbia River. That's his drop zone. It's 99% land, and I'm going to say it's 30% super dense forest and 70% farmland. And so the idea that he jumps from this plane with a parachute strapped to him, which we know that much, we know that he at least strapped a parachute to himself. So he's jumping out of the plane in that area. If he pulls the ripcord and doesn't survive the jump, if he ends up in a tree, if he couldn't handle the landing, if he hit a ravine or he's on the side of the mountain, he broke both his legs, He is found immediately. He is found as soon as the sun comes up. But the idea that he's a no pull and we haven't found him in 50 something years, forget about it. Absolutely forget about it. So that only leaves me with one option is he survived the jump. Because you have to, I need to get a statistician on here, but you need to figure out the odds that you're going to pull the ripcord, which are insanely high, and then the odds that there's some sort of parachute malfunction where he does pull the ripcord, but the parachute doesn't work and we know more than likely he didn't have an awesome reserve chute. But the odds of all that happening for him to auger into the ground, as Himmelsbach would like to say, is so small that I can only believe he survived the jump because I can't even wrap my head around the idea of his parachute deploying and he doesn't survive because he would have been found immediately.
Yeah, and the other thing is, I know it's been brought up that the size of the conical is small and might have led to serious injury. But if you look at the World War II Army regs about what size parachute for various pilots to get, the cutoff was 180 pounds. So if you weighed 180 or less, you got I think it was the 24 foot. And if you were over that, it might be 28 foot is my recollection. But in other words, I think what he jumped with, although small, was still something that 30 years prior was considered sufficient to safely get you to the ground.
Oh yeah, it's not going to be an awesome ride. It's going to be a
Right.
rough opening and a rough landing.
Mhm.
But you do have a maybe 2 minutes of just free floating there. Like, wow, I did it. I did it. Right before your super rough landing. But every every skydiver I've talked to is like, "Oh yeah, I could survive that jump." And they're a cocky group of people um, just by the nature of what they do, what they choose to do for fun, what they're paying to do. They're bold risk takers who like to take chances, and that's who most skydivers are. I'm sure someone's going to write me and be like, "Hey, I'm real reserved, blah, blah, blah," whatever. Most of them are. And the fact that all of them say that it's a survivable jump, and I can't get past the idea of if I'm going to commit a daring crime and I have some sort of special skill that the average person doesn't. If I told Travis Pastrana, you have to rob a bank, I guarantee you he's planning to get away on a dirt bike. If I told Alex Honnold, hey, you have to rob a bank, he's going to plan someone where he scales the side of a building right after because he has a skill that nobody else has. Travis Pastrana, he can ride a dirt bike better than anyone else can, so he's going to use that as his method of escape. So I think if Cooper is planning this, at the very least he knows how to parachute. But I think based on the fact that he chose a night jump in a place where it's likely going to be raining. I mean, I would just if you I would bet money right now that on November 24th of this year it rains in Clark County, Washington. I'll make that bet with you right now. The odds are in my favor. So he's choosing a night jump. He's more than likely going to be doing it in the rain and more than likely not going to be landing in the most ideal place. He could have jumped over Reno or just outside Reno. I mean, Southeast Oregon is pretty remote and pretty flat and pretty safe for you to make a night jump. Clark and Cowlitz County in Washington would not be my choice for a night jump. So I think that's why he picked that. He's a guy who I can do this difficult thing and you can't follow me because I'm better. I I can't believe that it was he wrote it down on a napkin and then committed this skyjacking the next day. Because if you had any familiarity with that area, which it seems like he does, you will know that by 4 o'clock it's going to be dark. And he
Right.
doesn't he doesn't leave Portland until 2:50. So he is planning a night jump.
Now, one of the interesting things, and not necessarily Vordahl, but we were thinking, well, there were so many Army Navy stores back then. Could you just buy one of every kind of parachute and just be ready for how to put on no matter what they brought? That was kind of the mindset we thought of a guy like Vordahl, because he didn't bring his own chute, which might indicate something, but
And you could buy parachutes at military surplus then. Mark Meltzer
yes.
told us that he did. It was his first
Yeah, we
parachute.
found all kinds. They had so many. We found one ad where they took one to create an indoor golf thing in the 60s, because they're like, what do we do with all these extra parachutes and whatnot? So yeah, he seemed comfortable with rain or the conditions based on what the other passengers were talking about. He wasn't. He was
Forget
just kind of
comfortable. I'm saying he chose those
chose it
conditions.
on purpose. Yeah. Yeah.
Because if I'm going to skyjack a plane and I know I'm going to jump out, I'm probably picking Nebraska or Kansas, or maybe I'll land in the. I don't want to land in the desert. Yeah, I'm picking some Midwest farmland where I'm just going to land in a cornfield and then I'm immediately hidden and I can just walk out from there. And it's not
Mhm.
hard in Kansas or Nebraska to find a cornfield.
Yeah, the other thing, one aspect that led people to believe he was an expert would be, well, he quickly found the parachute packing cards. And one thing that surprised me was I found an article in 1944. There's a C-47 101st Airborne plane that catches on fire, and the pilots bail out with their parachutes, get to the ground, and after they land, surprisingly, through enemy fire to get to the chutes because they wanted to open the packing card to see who packed it for them because they wanted to thank them. And that's where I came across, photos of Army riggers with the packing cards. And I found out you can go to eBay and type in the Army packing cards and you'll see them. They're filled in this jump in 1964, 1971. So, I'm open to the idea that maybe knowledge of those was, if these were military shoots, maybe didn't necessarily indicate expertise.
I'm with you on that one because I said on the show that, the fact that he checked the packing card to me says a recreational skydiver and not a military parachutist. And then I got several messages and emails from military members who were like, I trained at Fort blah, blah, blah. And we were always taught to inspect the packing card. And then somebody else would be like, I was military and this and that. And we always, first thing you did was check the packing card. So that definitely threw that up for me. But it is interesting talking about the parachutes, which I absolutely hate doing, but here we go. For a while it was, a sport parachute and a military one. He chose that. Well, now we know they were both similar. Now we know that it's more than likely that he checked the packing cards for both of them and then slid both packing cards into the other parachute. But what I think's interesting is that the copycats that were skydivers, they brought their own gear.
Shoot, right.
And if I'm going to do this myself and I have all this skydiving experience, I'm bringing my own custom rig that I prepared, that's for me, that I know with me, plus this 25 pounds of stuff I'm going to carry, I'm good to go. And I have experience in this setup that I know that Chris over at the FBI didn't sabotage.
Mhm.
But Cooper just asks for parachutes.
You trust that whatever they bring him, he'll be able to utilize and trust that it'll get him there, or he'll have enough knowledge to put it on and exit the aircraft.
But that even goes against my theory of that I
Yeah.
think he planned this forever because I feel like someone that had planned this so well and was so smart. I don't think that Ted Braden would ask for a parachute. I think Ted Braden would have brought his own parachute on. And I've thought about that a lot because I mean, he is a military guy and a lot of times gear gets handed to him. He uses it, and then who cares about it? That was the US government's machine gun, not mine. But I think that Ted Braden probably would have brought his own parachute on board because then that's something that
he could count on that doesn't he doesn't have to worry about the gear that he's been given for this mission. He can trust his own gear that he brought on. I mean, McCoy had similar-ish military experience and recreational experience and chose to bring his own parachute.
Hmm.
What do you think that says about Cooper that he asked for a parachute instead of bringing his own? Because obviously it wasn't hard to bring your own parachute on a plane.
Right, and that's recent information about the copycats. I have to when every single they fall into one category or the other. If they had done it, then they brought their own, and if they didn't, they didn't. I know it's not the number isn't 30 or 50, but it's 100% of what did follow, that they wanted to have their own rig. They knew how, maybe what their descent rate would be, and it would be the right kind for them, and they could be certain to get it on properly. And so I would say that no, he didn't have a a skydiving background, that or else he would have done like the others did. That would be my guess.
Do you think the reason he asked for two sets of parachutes is so they wouldn't sabotage it?
Yes, yeah, I think that was a smart strategy. you know well, how can I make sure they send me one that's good? Well, I'm going to ask for four, or two sets. And the fact that it was maybe in his mind was going to be an all or nothing deal. If they're willing to give him all the money he's asking for, they're probably going to say, and give him the shoots that he's asking for. Or it's going to be the other extreme. He's not getting anything. Or I would think once he saw that he had the money, that maybe that would give him some confidence that they were acceding to all his demands equally, and not giving him good money but bad parachutes. I don't know.
Yeah, he put him in a tough spot
Hmm.
because Northwest Orient is worried about losing their multi-million-dollar plane, over $200,000, and you were worried about the lives on board, and then the FBI can't really sabotage the parachutes now because if one of them is for Tina, then they just killed Tina.
Right. And if I'm Northwest Airlines, I'm envisioning like a 99.9% chance that whatever this guy does he jump? Does he stay on the plane? We're gonna get this guy eventually arrested, and we'll get our money back one way or the other.
Oh,
And yeah,
everyone was super confident there's no way he's getting away with this.
right. I remember Himmelsbach's comment, we'll still be able to get home for Thanksgiving dinner, and they had no idea there were going to be many Thanksgiving dinners, still unsolved.
So much time later. Was his bomb real, Chris?
I would say yes. I mean, I don't have a strong opinion. I would say more than 50-50, though, owing to Tina's background with I think it's her dad, but uh,
That sounds
it,
right.
with her precise description and so forth of what it looked like and the battery type. And again, I'm just deferring to others with more knowledge on that, but he he had to be sure that he could convince them. And he uh the description is such that it seems to align with a real bomb.
This is one thing I know I just talked about it, but I really was super confident the bomb was fake.
Hmm.
And now I'm leaning more towards it being real because if you do have a fake bomb and you're in a situation where you would use it and it's fake, boy, is that embarrassing. I'd rather have a real bomb myself than be in a situation where I'm stuck with a fake bomb and everyone's looking at me.
If you're willing to commit a capital crime, then you're probably open to carrying something that is that destructive, right? Because I mean, if you're going down, and it's part of it's because of the presence of the bomb, as opposed to a displayed handgun or something, that it is what's going to convince the airline and your mind to give you what you're asking for.
Cooper was able to, with his bomb, remain a passenger to all the other passengers. They just thought he was just another guy that's on this plane. If he was waving around a gun, that creates a completely different situation right away. You can,
Right.
like, McCoy tried to do that. I really like the pin from a hand grenade in the note. I think that's so cool. That probably came from a movie or something. I can't imagine that he
Mhm.
created that, but that's pretty cool. But McCoy wasn't able to keep the scene calm, cool, and collected.
I mean, he could barely board the aircraft without out already making it obvious what was about to go down to the pilot. I mean, Cooper's ability to dupe everyone else on board on a 2+ hour delayed flight that nothing unusual was going on is almost more amazing than his escape, you know? I mean, people are like, what? You know, or
And the fact that, Tina sits next to him, and that's unusual. I'm not on a plane and I look across the aisle and the hot young stewardess is sitting next to someone the whole time. That doesn't happen. Like, they're busy, they're working. And the idea that Bill Mitchell can look at him and have this thought like, why is she paying attention to that geeky old guy and not me? And have a look at him, a good look at him, and not Cooper was so cool that the thought didn't even cross his mind that, oh my God, we're being hijacked by that guy. Just like that guy's a geek was what went through his head. Well, Bill Mitchell is being held hostage. That guy's a geek.
it's almost like making that first impression, you know, what he wore and carried and looked like almost disarmed witnesses from really paying attention to him. And then only later they probably said, "Oh, I wish I had turned around or looked more at his features or something like that."
I can't remember who said it on the show, so I apologize, but I'm quoting you anyway. But it was it was extraordinary how ordinary he was, and just extraordinarily average in every way. Because if we knew for a fact that Tina offers him a cigarette and he was like, "No thanks, I don't smoke," that would narrow the pool more than men that did smoke.
Right, right. But he never said anything or did something that immediately narrowed the field, you know, way
No,
down.
it's not like the stewardesses all said he had an earring. He had one earring.
Right.
One anything. It could be like he had a crooked nose. It looked like he broke his nose when he was a young man. Anything like that, an identifying thing. And that's my big problem with Dwayne. Like Dwayne Weber, here's another thing I've changed my mind on in the Vortex. When I entered, he was not a suspect and was a joke and was the person that was being pushed by a lady who had wild ideas. And then things started to change a little bit. And I was like, well, maybe I need to have a look at Dwayne again. And there's some interesting stuff there. And Joe Weber is quite a character. And uh, she's probably got to go on the Mount Rushmore of the Vortex, just for everything she did and who she was. But the thing that with Dwayne that like right away, if you and I saw Dwayne at a bar and then he got into a fist fight and ran out the door, the first thing you and I would say about him is like he had big ears that stuck out.
Right.
And then we would continue to describe him. But right away we're going to be like he had these big ears that stuck out on the side of his head. And any suspect that has something like that. McCoy also has ears that stick out quite a bit. And he tried to wear a wig that would help hide his ears on his skyjacking because of course he would know, hey, I have this one feature that's prominent that people are going to be like this. He has big ears that stuck out. And even sort of like Vince Peterson has that a little bit with his chin. Some suspects, their eye color doesn't match. I'm willing to be a little bit more loosey-goosey with eye color. Ted Braden, he's too short. I'm willing to be a little bit more loosey-goosey on the height, especially seated in an airplane. But if your suspect wore an eye patch, like they're not in. They're not in. If we heard that Cooper wore an eye patch, boy, would this be so much easier. Well, did they ever have an eye patch? No. Okay, well, it's not Cooper. Although an eye patch would actually be a pretty sick disguise.
Right. It would draw attention. It would be fake, but yeah, it would
Yeah, it
still.
would draw a lot of attention. Yeah, and then we would be debating that it was fake the whole time, so we'd have the same suspects. Okay, I take the eye patch thing back. Okay, speaking of the description of Cooper, what do you think of the fact that we have two major sketches? I know there's seven or whatever number there is, but we have the Bing Crosby and the Cary Grant sketch. And those are the two ones that most people would be familiar with. What do you think of the fact that the FBI released two sketches 18 months apart and they look wildly different?
Yeah, and because most people paid attention to the first one, I mean, now as you know, I picture the ultimate one when I think of what Cooper may have looked like, the darker version and kind of the slightly broader face. But I think when they switched that, then it made people wonder, well, what did the guy look like? You have two things that don't seem like a minor adjustment. Who are we look now? I'm looking for, even more people because it could be either. So sometimes a suspect will match parts of both, and that's favorable. But yeah, the fact that you could put out two from a great artist, I think it either shows, witness adjustments of their recollection, or I think they were well intentioned, but it almost makes it more difficult than if there had just been one sketch,
Oh,
that
definitely.
you could rely on.
It's weird in this case. Like almost the first sketch nobody was happy with, but that's been in the public for a year now. We've
Mhm.
put that out for a year. And it's wild with this case with how many different suspects there are. Like Kenny Christensen is a fantastic match for the Bing Crosby sketch and not a good match for the Cary Grant. And to the same effect, William J. Smith, I think he perfectly matches the Cary Grant sketch, and I don't think he's a good match for Bing Crosby. But it's so weird that we have variations of the sketch, and you can sort of, well, my suspect matches the original sketch, but not the second one, or my suspect matches the second one, but not the first one. Or even I've seen people try to match like to Flo's Unsolved Mysteries Angry Vampire sketch. And it's like none of us are using that one. Like none of us are putting any weight in that. Because the Unsolved Mysteries was that 86 or 87?
Yeah, late
Somewhere around
80s.
there.
Sure. Yeah.
Late 80s. Because I would have seen it in reruns being like 8 years old.
Robert Stack tonight. Yeah, you could really
The
you get the
narration, the
impression,
music,
right?
it was so good. I remember it was like Unsolved Mysteries and then Rescue 911 on TV. My sister and I'd watch it all the time. Chris, why is this case still unsolved?
I think that the main reason is if there, one thing I would like to see is if there is any photos or video from the airport, from Portland Airport that day. I kind of wish that had been, and maybe it was. I haven't seen it. Like when I read articles, what the FBI is looking for. Were you there? Did you take pictures? Even if you don't think that. So I think part of it is it was in the sweet spot of history before you have surveillance cameras. We know that the magnetometer at the airport, hadn't been installed. I think Portland, it wasn't on the radar that they could really have a hijacking of this kind. So it was before you had the ability, and now you go later and we can search all those newspapers and we can look through a lot of archives that the FBI didn't have. So in some ways, it was just a moment in time where if you're not expecting it and you have the element of surprise and people are thinking it's a holiday tomorrow, can I get off work at 3 instead of 4? It just the timing was really optimal for and by doing it in November, you have darkness a little earlier in the evening, and just things that are favorable to for getting away with it. One thing I did find a 3-minute film taken inside Portland Airport 3 weeks after the jump. And they show us in color what gate 42 looked like. I think Cooper's gate was 54, but I liked it because you're kind of, and I found it at the Port of Portland archives, but it was neat to see what an empty gate in the evening would look like. And then you walk through corridors and eventually you get to the main terminal area and you see the Western Airlines ticket counter and the gentlemen in white shirts and thin black ties checking people in. You see the Port West, which is the Sky Chef restaurant sign there. You know, maybe there are other examples of film like that or still photos that have escape detection, or people, they're in somebody's attic or whatnot. So why hasn't it been solved? It's not lack of effort by the FBI and even by citizen sleuths to search things. It's partly the passage of time of the principals and maybe just missed opportunities. Like I said, other undiscovered movie footage or still photos.
Who do you think has put in more man hours at this point in time? The Vortex or the FBI?
That's a good question. I feel like in the Vortex, there's a high quality of the time usage. I kind of feel bad for the FBI agents at the time who were probably fielding the most inane callers and false leads, but it all had to be documented and sent up the chain of command and get to DC, and then they would send it back and say, here's what we want you to do. So I think those agents were diligent, but they thought the jump zone was a little bit further north than it was, or maybe they even had the mindset that, well, I'm sure it'll be solved by one of our other agents, in short order. So I would say that it's hard to beat the FBI. I can't even imagine how many hours in all the offices. I mean, you have things from the New Orleans office coming in Los Angeles, and anybody you mentioned, DB Cooper in Ohio, something would be sent. So just in raw hours, I'd say the FBI, but I feel like
Vortex is getting there fast.
the Vortex is getting there fast, and with technology, the analogy I use is like a best ball golf tournament. So if somebody finds something now, everybody can move from that spot, from that new information. And
That's a great way to say that, Chris. It's like a best ball tournament. We're all moving forward as far as the longest shot.
Mm-hmm.
That's well said. I like that attitude. That's what the Vortex needs to. Everyone needs to adopt that. This is a best ball strategy. We're all the best shot. Okay. What would it take to solve this case?
Well, I know there's various paths. One would be DNA. One would be somebody finding, the physical evidence the FBI says it needs, a parachute or money. One of the interesting things about the money, and I don't know much about currency collecting, but some of those bills, the so-called star notes, it was brought up at CooperCon 2023. Those might be sitting untouched in various collectors' boxes somewhere, and maybe as a family member sells those or goes online and checks that, a lot of the notes, I want to say a couple hundred that of the ransom that had those stars on them, and so that might be an avenue. So finding the money, I think those are the and I'm biased, but the tie, the ability to, like Tom K just found, Macron Laboratories, world renowned, when they looked at the tie, and each field of the tie had a maximum number of images or particles that were looked at, and then the microscope would move to the next field. So he has found that there's an additional 70,000, not additional, but a different subset of 70,000 particles. And some of those will be an overlap because when you do another scan of the same field, you might pick up the same before you maxed out. But it's possible there's something in there that's very unusual and, only Lockheed did it, or something that narrows the field down.
That'd be nice.
Yeah. One of the challenges has been trying to align the XY axis. In other words, when each of these stubs was put into the microscope to be recorded, it does note how far left to right X and up and down Y, but not necessarily where the top of that stub was when it went in there. And so that's something that Tom has figured out, using the wires to align north and south. So I just I think there's hope from the science area, whether it's DNA or the tie.
Why do you think he chose the name Dan Cooper?
If I had to guess, in his mind, it was a random name, but I want to think that subconsciously it has some significance to him. The copycats all used, random names. They didn't use, an uncle, a boss who dissed them, a character from something. So I think he picked a name that people wouldn't think twice about. He didn't pick an ethnic name that was unusual, just something. It is interesting. He said Cooper, Dan Cooper, and so there's different ways to read into that, but just probably picked a basic name. But I want to say that it's probably some subconscious connection that he selected for some reason. He doesn't want to pick something obvious because he's gone out of his way to make himself almost indetectable by being so mainstream. So, he's going to pick a basic name that he thinks won't be connected to him, but maybe it has some significance to him.
You don't think there's any connection to the comic book?
Only if it's indirectly. I spent a lot of time looking into, the Belgian version, getting information on that. I know there were 400,000 readers of that comic in Belgium. Recently, I found that Penny's had 97 stores in Belgium at the time of the jump, but it wasn't in English. And I think if he was from Eastern Canada, there'd be some kind of, accent detectable or not. If he is a Vordahl-like person from the Pacific Northwest, I mean, the nearest airport to Pateras is an airport named after Clyde Pangborn, who's in the issue with Dan Cooper, in the Bill Barnes Air Trails. So, that whole area, in fact, Pangborn came through there. I think the Wenatchee Airport currently is the Pangborn Airport. He was well known there, and so the quick answer is I don't think a connection to the comic book Dan Cooper. Could there be a connection to the air trails? More likely. But I still, if you force me to pick a category, I'd say in his mind a random selection.
That's fair. I want there to be a comic book connection.
Right.
I don't necessarily believe there is one. But I really want to. I really, really want to believe that there's a connection there. Okay, Chris, why have so many people confessed to this crime?
I think because there were no, quote, victims, no obvious victims. I'm sure if you're on board and this is going on, it could have even a lifetime impact on you.
But no physical harm.
No physical harm. And almost immediately you see the public reaction is this guy's a Robin Hood. He's stuck it to the man. He's, we kind of hope he gets away with it. So that's going to predispose you to say, yeah, that was me. I did that. Or immediately after someone passes away, you say, oh, that was him. But you don't bring it up while the poor guy can defend himself. So that's always suspicious to me. you know.
That is a little bit of an interesting one. Do you think Cooper confessed to this crime to anyone?
I don't think he did. I think if his purpose, if he makes the jump and he keeps the money with him, and it turns out that he did not spend the money, then he must have had in his mind some reason for pulling this off. And so, unless he had,
Satisfying some sort of grudge.
yes, yeah. And I think once he saw the hype over it not being solved, it's almost, yes, he could come forward and be famous and sell a book, but he's almost more infamous because he's like, I know I got away with it, and that's good enough. I don't need other people to know about that. And I don't know how to read that psychologically, but I think that kind of unusual mindset where you take more pride in accomplishing something, even if others don't know about it, that is near historical, then maybe that would be a reason.
Yeah, because I can't imagine myself like that story about the Ferrari dealership where all the cars were stolen 25 years ago. I did that. That would be me at a bar telling a stranger. Like there's no way I could keep that a secret. Once I got away with it for 7 days, I would start telling everyone. I have all those cars. You should come see them at my house. Bring your friend. He'd love to see them too. Like I could never have done this skyjacking and then just quietly read the paper where I'm reading an article about myself. I'm clipping that magazine or newspaper article out. I'm mailing it to my grandmother. Although if I'm Cooper, she's probably dead. But I'm mailing it to my kid. I'm mailing it to my kid's friends. I'm telling everyone. I really struggle to believe that Cooper never told anyone. But at the same time, there's a lot of confessions in this case. And there aren't a lot of other true crime cases that I'm aware of where we have dozens or, to quote Bruce Smith, the FBI told him that they had somewhere between 900 and 1,000 confessions. And the idea that you have that many confessions, and even in the vortex, we're taking seriously at least a dozen confessions and discussing these suspects that have either confessed directly or their family members have come forward saying that they confessed to them, like Gossett, for example. What is it about this that there are so many confessions? There is like you said, no one got hurt. There's sort of a cool James Bondy aspect to him. But the one that shocked me the most was talking to Larry Carr and him saying, yeah, oh yeah, when I was the lead agent on this case, I remember being on conference calls with agents in other offices that someone came into the FBI office to confess. That blows my mind. I get that I'm on my deathbed and I didn't really do the things I wanted to do in life, so I'm going to make up a wild story and tell my family. Or, maybe I'm just sort of a con man, slippery guy like Gossett, and I'm going to weave this yarn to a couple people, but not go into an FBI field office and lie about it. That's so nuts.
Yeah, the only scenario I can think of that you might tell is if maybe your wife is an accomplice. And the only reason I think that is looking at how did he get to the airport, or how did he get there without anyone knowing. And some of the interesting things, like in September of 71, a new shuttle service is established from the parking lot to the terminal. And we know that because, there's a picture of this Port of Portland minibus. And also, it was showing up in the Sky Chef restaurant ads. Hey, we've got this new shuttle. You can. So sometimes I wonder, did a spouse, drop him off like on the sidewalk near there and he could take the shuttle, or would he just walk from there? Maybe you don't need the shuttle.
Well, Portland I wasn't at the Portland airport in 71, but I've been there many times since, and they have a real nice drop off and pickup. And I've thought about the accomplice thing before. So Cooper gets dropped off at the airport. The accomplice here makes sense because they couldn't figure out how he got to the airport. Although a taxi cab driver isn't going to notice a guy in a suit that most likely didn't say anything and was trying to not be noticed. So he would have just sat in the back and stared directly out the window, and it would have been the fourth male passenger in his 40s in a suit that cab driver had that day going to the airport. But if you do have the wife accomplice, and the wife accomplice is interesting because that's one of the only scenarios where I could see not talking. So Cooper is mid to late 40s, maybe even up to 58 years old. And so he's got a wife at this point in his life. As most men that age would, especially in 1971, his wife drives him to the airport, and then she drives to the area he's hoping to land in. And he has to get to a payphone or get to a signal, or maybe he was even hoping I'll walk to this corner and you wait at that corner, which that would be pretty hard not being able to see the ground. I'm going to walk to a certain point. But the wife is the only scenario where I could see the secret being kept. And if they have a family, then you do have to wait until Cooper and his wife dies to bring that forward. Although I don't see any situation where we're going to prosecute a woman that's 90 who comes forward and says Cooper was her husband. There's no way. Yes, I drove him to the airport, but it was 53 years ago, and he was 45 and I was 32 and it was 71. And back then the man was the boss and this is what happened. I was involved, but blah, blah, blah. There's no way anyone would prosecute her today. No way are we prosecuting her as an accomplice to this crime, especially if she comes forward with all the information. I'm closing this case. Would you like to close this case by talking to me, or would you like me to just die? Here are your options. I think the FBI would be glad to hear her story and say, absolutely, we will not prosecute you for this. Because all you did was drive there and pick him up.
Right. One of the related to being dropped off, and whether it was a taxi or an accomplice, I thought it was interesting at 2:45 p.m., the day of the jump, at the airport exit off the interstate was a massive crash that closed that access until 8 p.m. according to this article. Now, we all know that Cooper was there before that, but you just kind of wonder sometimes when you see things like that, the series of events that had to go right for him. Like, I'm going to get there just before, if I came by interstate, who knows? But, just these unusual things that had to go right for him. One other thing about the Portland airport that I wonder, I know in the 302s, they were wondering, is there a Sky Chef restaurant at that airport? And we know now there was, and it, operated under the name Port West, and they had an employee cafeteria as well. Where that restaurant is located is, you can kind of picture that the terminal is like a Y shape, and the upper left part of the Y are the gates where Northwest Airlines would go, and off to the right were the United gates in general. And in the middle of that Y, looking north, was where the restaurant was, because back then you couldn't pull up an app and say, when is that flight from Spokane landing? And I'm not saying he was in the restaurant watching, but he could, if he didn't want to be at the gate until it landed or something like that, you had a good view from there to, okay, there's the Northwest plane landing and, taxiing up. Not saying he did, but that was just something that I thought was interesting about the Portland airport, was that there is a Sky West and had a great view of the tarmac. You're sitting right there at the tarmac.
Well, the reason you keep saying Sky West or Sky Chef is because of his matchbooks, right?
Yes.
And so supposedly he had two matchbooks. One was a Sky Chef. The other was like a get your high school diploma by mail kind of a thing, right?
Right. International correspondence schools. And I'm not sure. The FBI had an interest in finding out if there was a Sky Chef restaurant there, and I don't know if they, but it turns out that they did. But yeah, in terms of the two matchbooks, yes, those were the two that they looked at.
And it just like every other evidence we have with Cooper, those are frustrating because he could have got that Sky Chef at the airport that day, and then that the get your high school diploma by mail thing, that would have been at a gas station, it would have been at a
Right.
magazine stand, it would have been everywhere all over the place because they just mailed a trillion of those out as an advertisement thing.
Right. And there were a lot of Sky Chef restaurants, and it was on planes as well.
Right. It wasn't just
Um,
a Portland local thing. It would have
right.
been
And he
many,
may
many
not have even take
airports.
the matches there. I just thought it was a neat vantage point, almost as good as the air traffic control above them. What's going on, or when the plane, because part of me wonders, okay, I've got my ticket, do I go to the gate right now? What I kind of wonder what he did between the time that he purchased the ticket and when he went to the gate. We know he was standing around in the gate area for some amount of time, but I wonder in his mind if he didn't want to be in any one place for more than a certain number of minutes. Or
Because he only purchases his ticket like 20 minutes before the flight or
yeah,
something, right?
right. And what's interesting about the gate that he left out of was the nearest one. If in that Y shape I'm talking about, the left part, it's the very first gate on the left as you walk up there. So maybe if he wants to bail out or something like that, he's as close to, the terminal and going back out on the sidewalk if he ever wanted to back out of his plan.
That's an interesting way to look at it, Chris. I like that you've thought about it that much. Like he, based on even walking in, he could have just chosen to bail out that day. How much time do you think Cooper spent planning this?
I would say that he had thought about it for 3 or 4 months if I had to pick kind of a median of the how long. And there was some impetus, whether it's the SST cancellation, if you think it's that, or something in the metals field. Was he a criminal who saw an opportunity? I don't think it would have been as long. I don't I don't think of most criminals like planning that to that extreme that far out. Like one of the guys that I looked into, his name was Frank Lawrence Sprenz, and he in the late 50s, early 60s, he would rob a bank, head to the airport, steal an aircraft, and then he had 35 aliases. He was eventually on the FBI most wanted list. He hid money in his rafters. He traveled 25,000 miles on the run before he was caught in Mexico. But as good as he was, it's not like he sat around for 6 months to plan each heist. He was kind of a spontaneous guy. And I'm just guessing that this crime involved more planning than a typical bank robbery, and some event 3, 4 months maybe prior to that set him on this path to commit the hijacking.
I know you're a Vordahl guy, but I'm hoping you can answer this without a Vordahl bias. Do you think that this was Cooper's only crime or that he was a criminal?
I'm probably in the minority on this, but I think it was his only crime. I think it was something pushed him over the edge, and I don't think he did anything after. It's not a high probability guess, but it's so hard to get away with one crime that I'm just going to guess that he didn't previously get away with crimes or have a rap sheet that would have drawn attention. Because most criminals, I think, tend to recommit the same kind of crime, like, oh, art's been stolen, well, who's stolen art in the past, or whatever it might be.
So based on that, you think it's McCoy?
The obvious the obvious answer, but you know so I'm guessing that this was a one-off, and part of how we got away is other people would say, no, there's no way that John James did that, or whoever Cooper is. I don't know. He must have had aerospace knowledge, the Boeing 727 and opening the door. But there were just the element of surprise is a huge asset. Being the first to actually jump out of the aircraft. The money had to be there. It had to be late enough in the day, but not so late that the banks were already closed. And he didn't want to probably jump at midnight. So I think it was thought out and probably a one-off crime.
Do you think Cooper knew that there was $250,000 set aside for a hijacking or a ransom situation? Not a hijacking, but
No, I think he took his chances. He knew that Seattle had the largest banks in the Northwest. You'd have to go all the way to San Francisco or all the way to Denver or Minneapolis to encounter a larger bank base. And there were just a lot of articles. In fact, 4 days before the jump, on the front page of the Oregonian, it talks about a $200,000 extortion, so completely unrelated. So he was probably playing a game of how much can I reasonably extract, but it's not so high. And I think he was prepared if they said, we only have 125, he probably would have said, okay, I'll go with that. But he picked a number high enough that might be achieved, and probably was pleasantly surprised they said, okay, we'll do it.
And he boards a plane at 2:50 and he hijacks that plane immediately. So he knows this message is going to get to a bank before 5 o'clock. So even if the FBI had to go to 10 banks in Seattle to get the 200 grand, they could have done that. So there is no need to know that C first had that set aside, but I just like to ask it in case
it's a big Northwest hub as well. So if I had to just guess where Northwest had financial connections or deposits, it's probably going to be Seattle, Minneapolis, wherever their big hubs were is probably where their employees are, and therefore where some substantial banking. And since they were Northwest Orient and flew a lot to Asia, I think that's another reason they have to keep probably a lot of funds there in Seattle or even possibly Anchorage. Yeah.
If I hijacked an Alaska Airlines plane, which would be probably the equivalent today to Northwest Orient, if I hijacked an Alaska Airlines flight in Seattle and asked for 1.5 million, which would be roughly the equivalent to Cooper's, I think they could scrape up 1.5 million in the Seattle area. Although I'm not going to do that. I just want to make that clear.
It's a strictly hypothetical.
Strictly hypothetical. All right, Chris, no more screwing around. And I know you know the exact answer to this question. How'd the money get to Tina Bar?
Well, I'm going to play it right down the middle. I have found things on both sides, like when Mr. Fazio said, I think that the money floated down on mini icebergs. So, I thought, well, I'm going to search for that. That can't pop. Oh, wait. In January of 1979, I have pictures of small chunks of ice going down the river because there was a huge, so that's possible. I'm going to say slightly more likely than not that it was human intervention. And the reason is because I don't have resolution on this research. I've kind of run into a roadblock, but we know that in May of 72, that the sand part of the Fazio's operation belonged to the Fazios because it's in the newspaper. There's been a break-in at 11600 Northwest Lower River Road, Fazio Brothers Sand. And that's also the exact address that's in the 302s when in 1980 the money's found. But if you look in May of 71 and you look at 11600 Northwest Lower River Road, it will refer to A and A Sand and Gravel. at that address because they have a break-in and they're reporting someone has stolen a grinding wheel. And also A&A Sand and Gravel has an ad separate from that that has that address. And the A is a gentleman named Andy Abrams. And so one thing I'd like to have a better feel is did other sand operations have access to that property? We know about fishermen, we know about late night party going, we know about the Fazios down on the beach. But was the sand operation solely someone else's, or did they allow others to come in? Because Andy Abrams had employees who were actually shot at in the newspaper at other locations, and he had filed bankruptcy. And he also had an ad, the only one that I saw, that said he would haul rock from one place to another. So those kind of things.
I haven't heard any of that before. I've never heard that name.
Yeah, I try not to put a name out there and ascribe anything negative to it. It's strictly for me trying to understand ownership of the sand part, the southern part at 11600.
Right, but that is interesting. If somebody else is working sand at that location, then that is interesting.
And again, that's sometime between May of 71 and May of 72. Like I could find out tomorrow that in June of 71, Abrams no longer went there or something. And maybe it's a question I have to somehow route to the Fazios, who I don't, think anything negatively of them. But was it A&A and others could just come in there and buy sand from the Fazios? Or when I've been to Tina Bar one time, you see Fazio Brothers sand and gravel trucks. So in my mind, it's only their trucks accessing and delivering sand and so
Right,
forth.
but who knows
So,
over the years how many other trucks came in and were
right.
purchasing product from them and delivering it
Right.
through their own
And the
business.
reason was, and this idea came from others, in the vortex, but they were looking, there are several sand pits in that landing area near orchards and battleground, and was there any transfer of rock from there with Fazios? And I have not seen any evidence of that, but the fact that other people had access, at least in May of 71. And to me, when I visualize a break-in, I'm reporting a break-in, it's something I own there. So I just kind of want to see if I know that their New Columbia Gardens owned many acres around there for a long period of time before 71. But in terms of just that specific address and the sand operation, I'd like to get a better understanding of what was going on there as of November of 71.
I used to ask people, does this story get the attention that it deserves? Because I didn't think that it did. But now this story gets a little bit more attention. And there's more people on it and more people care about it. If I'm comparing the Vortex now to 2018, it's completely different. It is completely different. And there are literally thousands of more people in the Vortex than there were. Do you think this story gets enough attention, gets the attention that it deserves? Does it get too much attention?
I think it's about right. I think if there was new information or a major development, I think it would be a lead story on major news outlets. Immediately somebody has been arrested by the FBI. I can, the one aspect I would say is as you get further away from the Pacific Northwest, I'm not sure what the awareness or the following is, but you look at the Facebook group, Eric's Facebook group, you've got people from New Zealand, England. When they asked what states people were from at the most recent CooperCon, I mean, there were 15 or 20 states right off the bat. So I think there's interest, knowledge. I see younger folks intrigued by it. And the other thing is that you've got people with lots of different backgrounds in a group like that. So if all of a sudden there's a new piece of evidence in field X, there's probably somebody in our group, or, there's something in Greenville, South Carolina, there are people, with knowledge in those fields, kind of like the metals guy that Nikki found, and that has been helpful to us. There are, if you think Cooper was a pilot, there are, pilots groups that can give their expertise. Mark Meltzer has done a great job talking about parachutes. So there's just a wide variety of knowledge. Does it get enough attention? I'm hoping getting just the name out there again, DB Cooper. Sometimes it's just, oh yeah, that I know about that case, but I kind of had put it on the back burner. I mean, there's really nothing more interesting than an unsolved mystery.
That's what I think for sure. But what do you think attracts this group of people? And it's 100% self-selecting. I think about that all the time. It's so interesting. Like if you put me and Tessa and Ryan and Bill Rollins in a room together, like what do the four of us have in common? Like nothing. Bill Rollins is from the Northeast, Ryan's from the South, I'm from the Pacific Northwest, Tessa's from Canada. Wildly different professions amongst the four of us. They're vastly different levels of income. It's interesting that we all somehow found this. What is it that drew us to this?
I think first and foremost that it's something unsolved that the best investigative professional minds have looked at. That is the FBI, and maybe we have an interest in aviation, or
I don't.
you don't have any. Okay.
I mean, I have a
Uh,
little bit of interest. I
sure.
like looking at cool planes and stuff, but I wouldn't say that I have an interest in aviation.
hmm I'm gonna guess it's probably the just unsolved nature of it, and part of it is that once you do, like you said, self-select, you see that other people are interesting in general, even outside of Cooper. I mean, half the time we're talking about something other than the case, what's going on with you, or something with sports, or it could be other topics. So it just tends to be a good group of people that you'd want to, hang out with, and also just a lot of good, interesting, divergent research. Just, I mean, I think about things that I've looked into that I really hadn't looked into before. So suddenly you get new terminology and new uh, knowledge about aerospace, or what was going on back then, or the layoffs, or how bad things were with Seattle unemployment at the time. Just different pieces of information that are interesting.
Oh yeah, I mean, most of what I know about aviation and parachuting comes from my love of the DB Cooper case. Like, I know so much about parachuting, and I have one tandem jump under my belt, one tandem jump, but I know so much about the history. I know so much about these various models. I can tell you the difference between, the parachute and the container and the packing card. And that all comes from DB Cooper, not because I was researching that for anything else.
Right. And I'm going to guess for most people, it's maybe the one case or hobby type thing that they're into. And then when they see the kind of the quality of and new information that the case is generating, it's also a case with some hope. So it's unsolved, but it seems to be moving in a positive direction with new information. You got Tom Kay and his science, and you've got Eric getting the word out, and you've got, lots of people in the vortex that are, constantly, finding new information and sharing it. So I think it's unsolved, but you can possibly see it getting solved, that maybe that's what draws people in.
Will this be solved?
I think so. I, I'm going to say it's more likely than not, just because I think that there will either be some scientific methodology that we don't have currently that will work, or I still hold out hope of some random another movie from Portland Airport, except it's 3 weeks earlier and it's Grandma Smith flying in from Little Rock, and we were there that day as she landed at 2:30. And you know, I think it's either some outlier like that or new science.
Could you be convinced by a confession with no evidence?
I think I don't want to be the doubting Thomas, but I think I need to see, okay, you say it was you and you say you put the parachute here, or here's how you spent the money. I need to verify that, you know, even if he could, or he provides something that the FBI, they say there were no holdbacks, but he has some information that they go, wow, we did not release that, and only Cooper could know that. But for me, I'd need to see more than that.
I've thought about this a lot because there have been a lot of confessions and I'm a gullible fool. And, let's say tomorrow that Trenton Higgins is on his deathbed and he comes forward with a wild story about him being Cooper and has all these details and from the plans to his boots touching the ground to everything and lays it all out and then passes away. Could I believe that at this point when I've heard many other confessions? It would have to be such a good story. And then, of course, the Vortex is going to go crazy on this guy with every form of research that we have. And, his third cousin's neighbor is going to be interviewed by someone that says they're a DB Cooper fan. Could I be convinced by that story? Part of me says yes, because I want to. I want to hear it. I want to be excited by it. But without anything else to corroborate it, it would be so tough for that to get any traction, even at this point in time.
Mhm.
You would get the typical same outlets that run DB Cooper stories every year running that. The case is solved again. But I don't think you would get a good percentage of the Vortex to go along. It would send a lot of us into fury, but
Yeah. Where if there was some evidence that for sure that they were in Portland, or just how did you get there? I guess you can't say show me the money, but just
yeah.
show me one of the bills, or explain what happened to the money, you lost it or you intentionally didn't spend it. But yeah, that would be intriguing.
What happens when this case is solved? We find out tomorrow exactly who it was, and we know the story, or maybe we know who it is, but not the story, but it's solved. What happens to the Vortex then?
I actually think the vortex would get more active now, trying to put the remaining pieces of the puzzle together. It'd be like suddenly having you get a jigsaw puzzle and you put the outside straight edge. That's what I do. I put all the straight edges on the out. Okay, now I can work in, and now I know where the framework is. And I'm sure everyone's going to say, I want to know how the money got to Tina Bar and where the rest of it went. But you suddenly would be looking up their military record. Where did they reside? Where did they work? Just things that might corroborate, or you could probably through ancestry, you could suddenly get in touch with relatives. Hey, what do you think?
The
That type
Vortex
of
would be hopping right away, real
yeah,
quick.
it would be. Yeah,
But then, 6 months passes and we did all the research we could. We know who Cooper is. Does it just slowly disband and the sites fade away?
probably, unless effort moves to something else. But this seems like such a unique case that once all of the pieces are understood on it, I think, and there's closure. That's kind of the end goal, I think.
Do you
Um,
want the case to be solved?
sure, yes, definitely. Most of the time is how do you accomplish that? Uh, how I look at it, but yes, definitely, I'd love to know who, why, and how. Mhm.
Do you think that I want the case to be unsolved forever so that I can keep doing this show?
No, I think you're just interested in, and I think you're doing these interviews because it'll give hopefully information to get it solved, hearing from different folks and uh, getting the word out of where the status of the case currently is. So I think if you didn't want it solved, you wouldn't be, interviewing and trying to get information. That would be my guess.
You're right about that. I only ask because I've gotten that criticism, and it's so weird to me. Like, I want the case to remain unsolved so I can keep doing this show. Like, this isn't how I make my living by any means. And I've said a trillion times I want to know the answer to this. And the reason I'm so stoked about people like you, Chris, is that I'm not trying to solve this case. I'm a fan of this, and when I asked you like why this group? Why are we involved in this? Why are we here? But it's a self-selecting crowd. The idea that there is a mystery and we don't know the answer to it, that's the kind of thing where I'm so frustrated by it. I'm like, why are we talking about politics when we don't know who built the pyramids? Like, that's all we should be talking about is who built the pyramids and how, because we don't know that. And so that's sort of the way my mind works. And I love doing the show and I love talking to all the DB Cooper folks, but would I agree to stop doing the show tomorrow for the answer to the case? A million percent. A million percent. Like if I could talk to Dan Cooper instead of you, Chris, no offense, but that's what I would be doing right now. If I had the choice, oh, you can interview Chris about this, or you can have a secret conversation with Dan Cooper.
Totally understand.
And maybe I'd be willing to call you afterwards and clue you in on some stuff, unless I was sworn to secrecy. Okay, here's another real hard one for you. Is it possible that Cooper never jumped and just hid on the plane and then casually walked off somewhere in Reno?
I'm going to round up to 0%. That's about all I can say. I think there's just zero chance. You see the FBI's dogs going on the plane immediately. In fact, there's footage of the plane landing. No, I don't think there's any chance, 0.0% that he was hidden on the plane or left later, or walked off and no one noticed.
How about Cooper never existed? The flight crew made him up and then they just split the money.
Uh, I'm going to give the same answer to the first question. I just, these, it, if there had not been a hijacking, the crew had 4 more days together, and their next flight after Seattle was to Miami. And they were talking about how they were looking forward to some time off and that as a destination. And no, I think these were 4 professional people, the 3 pilots plus all of the flight attendants who were just going about their day and under unusual and unexpected circumstances did a great job and are good people.
They did do a great job. Tina, especially, a true badass.
Mhm.
And, we talk about Cooper being calm, cool, and collected, but Tina was as well. And I just, I know I've said this a trillion times, but I love the idea of her lighting his cigarettes and her just making talk with him, sitting next to him. It's wild. And, I'm not like glad this happened to Tina, but she was the perfect person to handle that scenario. And we sort of see that, Florence panicked and lost her cool a little bit. And Tina seems like she was quick to step in and be like, "Don't worry about it. I got this. I'll deal with this guy." And she deserves a lot of credit for being just as calm, cool, and collected as Cooper.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, he's shown her a bomb. In her mind, this is a real bomb.
Yep, you
And
can
her
never question the validity of
yeah.
somebody else's bomb.
And so if you're sitting next to somebody you believe that there's that bomb and you're able to from her perspective, I really think she put the passengers and she just thought, how do we get out of this situation and what's the best way maybe to diffuse it, pardon the pun, and just get everybody safely out of here. And to have that mindset at her young age is admirable.
Oh, 1,000,000%. She's totally a true badass. Speaking about men versus women, Chris, let's get you in some trouble here. True crime. If you're looking at the fandom of true crime, I would say it leans at least 75% female. DB Cooper, I would consider a true crime case. It is a crime. It was true. It's true crime. If I'm looking at my audience, if I'm looking at the people on the forums and everything, I'm throwing out 95% male. Why is that?
I don't know if it's the nature of the crime, like the aerospace connection or bank robbery. I don't know enough about other true crime to know if there are other aspects that are mostly male or not. It's a good question. I don't have a particular answer for
Because you're
what.
not a true crime fan,
I only know this one. I don't know other
which would be another
crime.
thing unique to the Vortex, is that a lot of Vortex people are only care about DB Cooper, and you got, crazies like Chris Cunningham, who's also into the Zodiac, but he would be in the minority. I mean, Bill Rollins, for example, he's not working on a bunch of other true crime cases. Or Ryan Burns isn't also working on the Atlanta child killer case. It's just DB Cooper.
And I wonder, I mean, I think of myself, I mean, I've been to the Portland airport, I've been to the Seattle airport, going to CooperCon. I drove from Portland to Seattle. I saw, all these towns that you read about. I've been to Mount Rainier. I think in some ways it's a true crime, but it's right in the backyard. It's like these are real towns and real airports and aircraft. And
Yeah, because it's not just limited to one city. It's not like, oh, this is a crime that happened in Springfield.
right.
It's like we have Portland, we have Seattle, we can include Ariel and Woodland and maybe Battleground.
So it's maybe that's one part of it, is it might skew to the Northwest, but like you pointed out, we've got people from the East Coast and other areas that are drawn probably to its unsolved status. And I think it's a rare crime where the criminal is not perceived as negatively as in other unsolved cases, maybe. In other
No one's
words,
claiming to be the Zodiac killer,
right.
but we just discussed that hundreds of people claim to be Cooper. Have you read anything about Lauren Hall?
Yes. And John's done great research on him. So I'm fairly familiar with him. Not as much on the JFK side, but definitely, Wichita, Boeing, and seen photos of him. And so a general knowledge. John was kind enough to, let us know about he was researching and so forth. And he's done a great job with it. But
Done a fantastic job. I just finished that book.
yeah, and just the thoroughness, and obviously an intriguing guy with multiple names. And you can pull up the CIA reports and the likeness and whatnot. So that's an example of you can have a new POI come out that maybe 6 months ago wasn't recognized, and so
Yeah, because
there's a lot of
Lauren
good
Hall's
research.
name had been like floated, but I've
Mm,
never seen anyone present him truly as a suspect like that. Because you would occasionally get like those montages of suspects, and there might be like a Lauren Hall, and then there's that was that one same picture of him, but he's never really been, as far as I'm aware, presented as a suspect like that. And boy, is it interesting. And I feel so bad now because I've done like 5 episodes where I completely shit all over the one suspect involved in multiple unsolved crimes. But then I'm reading that and I'm like, okay, well, obviously he's involved in
Yeah.
the JFK assassination on some level, and obviously he's involved with DB Cooper. I'm like, well, wait, am I that guy that's now it's one person involved in all these unsolved crimes? I mean, at least we're not connecting Jean Benet Ramsey and Teresa Hallback to Lauren Hall. But it's really
Right. And
interesting.
he has connection to Boeing, Wichita, and so forth. So there's some, you know, tangential 727 knowledge that you wouldn't get from, you know, some other cases where they say, well, maybe he's also DB Cooper, you know, and has no connection whatsoever.
Right, because at
Um,
least then we could say, well, oh, he has no aviation connection. Well, actually, I read the book. He has several aviation connections.
yes. Right. He'd almost be better if he didn't have the JFK part to say, oh, we're just kind of morphing from that side. Just on his own merit with what's going on, he definitely has some heft as a POI.
Oh yeah, but just the CIA was involved in so much insanely shady stuff in the late 60s and early 70s. Like there's this great book, Chaos by Tom O'Neill about the Charles Manson murders. It came out after I was already in the vortex. And so I listened to that book and it's so crazy. And there were so many times in that book where I'm like, is this real? I have to Google this. And I like stop the book and Google it. And it's like, yeah, the FBI or not the FBI, the CIA was dosing Johns. So like there'd be a prostitute on the street that was an undercover CIA informant or agent, and then would bring a man into a room, and then she'd pour him a drink with LSD in it, and then they would just observe him through a two-way mirror, knowing that like he could never tell anyone about this because he went there to hire a prostitute. When I heard that, I was like, there is no way the government would do that. There is no way the CIA was involved in doing that. And then boom, it's on Wikipedia. And oh, it was documented here and from this file release and from this. And I'm like, that's so crazy. Like, I don't know, did you ever read Nat LaFoulk's book about E. Howard Hunt being DB Cooper?
I haven't. I've looked into a little bit about Hunt and so forth. I love his testimony wearing
Oh
sunglasses there.
yeah. And even like that idea on the surface, when I ordered that book, I was like, oh my God, this is gonna be a wild ride. But reading it, I'm like, okay, well, that makes sense. I could see that happening. And it's so weird, just the behavior of the CIA. I don't know if it was they were testing out their powers or what they were doing, but that time period specifically, the late 60s, early 70s, they were up to some crazy shenanigans.
Right.
And so
You
it's tough to rule any of that stuff out.
Yeah. And, you know, speaking of the CIA, and we often talk about in Thailand, the 67 tests. One area I'm still kind of looking into is Boeing had a division in 1964 and probably ongoing where they try to make a case to the military about the military use of certain civilian aircraft. And so in 64, the Boeing military application department starts making interesting sketches. Like there's a sketch of a 727 and it has the phrase right on it, personnel airdrop, and it shows, you know, the parachutes squidding out. And in 65, in several newspapers in different states, they actually took a 727 and at low speed, you can see the flaps fully extended. And they did tests where they dropped cargo out the back. And at the, I want to say it right, it's the Patuxent, Maryland. The Navy has a air test center there where they can test aircraft to see how they would comply with like a carrier landing. And so there's a sketch in 64 from Boeing of a 727 on an aircraft carrier, and they actually did 5 simulated landings at this Navy carrier facility there at the Navy Air Test Center. And so part of me wonders if maybe within Boeing, if, I don't know if the FBI looked at everybody at Boeing or just people in certain sectors, but I kind of wonder if the knowledge that you could open that back door and put things out could have come as early as 64 or 65, rather than the 67 test. But that's something I'm still looking into.
Yeah, and that's interesting too because you have to think about like the knowledge base. So originally it might only be a couple of people that know that, and then they tell that many more people, then you have a test, and then you have it going on, and then you had it being tried out, Thailand or Vietnam. So that is interesting the way that knowledge would spread and how many people would know that. And that's a real tough number to figure out pre-internet.
Mm-hmm. They were already looking at all these crazy uses, as a refueling plane and all kinds of things. I know they were, but I was envisioning, some engineers saying, well, what if we do open up the door, if it's open the whole time, what can you throw out there? What are the aerodynamics? You just wonder if there are some tests internally that, in addition to the ones we've, seen from Boeing, that there were just some behind the scenes engineers that were, calculating all these coefficients of drag and everything, and if that info got out or not.
Yeah, it's interesting. The pilots didn't know it.
Right.
In 71, the pilots didn't know. They weren't sure if the plane could fly with the stairs down. But Boeing knew.
Right.
And a bunch of other people have tested it out. Chris, if I'm new to the case, maybe I have something to offer, a specialty or a skill. How should I go about researching this case?
Well, and I'm a little biased, but I think a great objective, detailed resource is Ryan Burns's norjac.org website. You'll just see a lot of the direct source information you can read yourself. And then the Facebook group, Eric Eulis's Facebook group, where you can quickly get caught up on what the latest discussion points are and what thoughts are maybe about different suspects, people from all kinds of backgrounds and so forth. So I mean, those are two good ones. And then in terms of your own research, I use newspapers.com a lot and archive.org. That's where we found a lot of those 1950s medals, magazines, and
Archive.org is a
yeah,
fantastic website. I fully support all of you donating money to that website. It's also the Wayback Machine for those of you that don't use the archive part.
so that's where I'd send folks, the Facebook group and norjac.org if they want to look up some direct piece of information on any aspect of the case, timelines, who the principals are. There's a lot of information still out there. For example, I never knew what, I hope I'm not mispronouncing his name, but Dennis Lisney, I found a picture of him.
I don't
He's
know if
with
it's
his wife.
Lindsay or Linz. I've heard
Yeah,
it
okay.
pronounced both ways.
But yeah, I found a picture of him, and they're out. He and his wife and family are outside their Portland home, and just sometimes when you come across pictures of these individuals, and I know the family of Captain Scott will be at the upcoming CooperCon, but these are real people who were doing regular jobs that day and interacted with the hijacker, and then had to go on about their lives. And it's just kind of interesting reading about maybe where they came from, what happened that day, and then what occurred after that with them.
Well, if people want to harass you and tell you that you're all wrong or that you're a pretty sharp dude and you know what you're talking about, is there somewhere we can find you?
Yes, absolutely. At the Facebook pages where I most often post or comment on things there,
And that's
or
the DB Cooper Mystery Group.
it is, yes. And or email me, Chris at Lincoln, LINCON.com. One of the nice things about that group is there's always a lot of behind the scenes help to others. Somebody may say, can you help me with this or that? And any number of people in that group will do so behind, here's what I found, or I couldn't find anything, but happy to help. So if somebody's looking into something, they'll find others willing to help them. And I'd encourage anybody, if you can, go to the upcoming CooperCon 2024. I know for me, attending the one in 21 really developed my interest, and I learned so much there. And you actually can great Q&A sessions after each talk, and socials in the evening where you can.
Oh, and that's the best part.
It is, yeah.
That's the best part.
So that would be something I'd encourage people to consider.
I'm gonna say it right now, I'll be there. I will totally be there, barring something terrible happening. I'm gonna be there. It's just such a good time, and it's the only time we're all together. It's the only time I'm gonna run into Cooperites from all across the United States.
Mm-hmm.
And
you
abroad.
might hear right. You might hear a British accent or Irish.
Yeah. All right, Chris. Well, thank you so much for coming on. I had a really good time talking to you, and keep up the good work. I hope to have you on soon again when you solve the case.
All right. Thank you, Darren.
If you want to reach out to Chris, you can find him on the DB Cooper Mystery Group on Facebook, or email him chris@lencon.com. As always, we've got links for you in the show notes. Do you know who DB Cooper was? Are you a relative of a suspect? Do you have expertise that could help us out? Hit us up. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or email us dbcooperpodcast@gmail.com. Thank you to Chris Brower for helping me make so much money from fantasy football. Thank you to Russell Colbert for helping me spend so much money on DB Cooper. Thank you to Darren Osadich for letting us play his tune. I'm Darren Schaefer, and thank you for listening to the Cooper Vortex.
Here's a story we all know about a man many years ago. Hijacked a plane, so we were told. Then he jumped into the cold. Lights are burning and a cigarette. He's in the air, the stage is set. Polite and kind, the people say it's time to make his getaway. This is how the story goes about the money and the man. DB Cooper, they call me now. Catch me if you can. Rolled up in his coat-built tie. He's got enough to change his life. Where he landed, no one knows. But from his tale, a legend grows. Was a cold, dark, rainy night. As he walked, he saw light. Held his cash close to his side. He just needs to catch a ride. This is how the story goes about the money and the man. DB Cooper, they call me now. Catch me if you can. soaking wet down to the bone. Look for a place to use the phone. Little cafe outside of town. Walked in and he just sat down. Met a man with a cowboy hat who told a friend right where he's at. Into the night he disappeared. And from that night a legend reared. This is how the story goes about the money and the man. D.B. Cooper they call me now. Catch me if you can. 40 years the secret's out. The story has been told. D.B. Cooper's done running now. He was 80 years old.